Thanks so much for that very inspiring speech, Apajok. I guess let's start tonight's conversation with a pretty broad question. Do you think in Australia there are enough opportunities for young people to be involved with leadership and with genuine representation?
Quick answer, no. When government is meant to be representing the society that it's governing, then we would see a youth minister at a federal level who is representing the views of all young people. Or we would at least have a national youth parliament like they have in the UK. And that's where you actually see young people from all over the country speak on issues that affect them. And that is participation, and that's a perfect example of what it would look like if we did have it.
Outside of government?
Yeah.
Are there enough opportunities for young people to engage outside of government? You've outlined some of the things you've been able to contribute to. Do you think we need to improve, I guess, in a broader sense, how we engage with young people and when we listen to them?
Yes, definitely. Working in the youth development space myself, what I've seen quite often is, hey, let's just ask this young person to contribute to our discussion. However, it's not in a genuine manner. It can also come off as tokenistic if it isn't supported, and if that young person isn't made aware of, hey, if you do contribute to this discussion, this is where it's going to go, or this is where it's not going to go. And I think that's something that we could work on a lot more. Yeah, and I think there's a new push to really do that with a lot of youth participation frameworks coming out. Like MYAN's just developed one, Cumberland Local Council's just developed one, and I think there's new ways to be moving forward, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
This year, youth enrolment for the upcoming federal election has reached record levels, with 88% of eligible 18 to 24-year-olds enrolled to vote. What issues do you think will influence how young people in Australia will be voting? And do you think there'll be a variety of issues that will really, speak to young people?
I definitely think so. I think, first and foremost, it's climate change. With all the rallies that is happening, that has been a huge push. And I also think last year's elections on marriage equality, that was also a huge encouragement for young people to really step up and be like, hey, we've got a voice here, let's use it. And the voice is voting. I think it depends where they live, what issues that they would be wanting to address. But I think it's about having that direct engagement with their local member and being able to rally and really bring their voices up. And if we did have a federal youth minister, then that would be the perfect avenue to get our voices all the way to the top.
Despite voter participation amongst young people increasing this year, we know that engagement within culturally and linguistically diverse communities is lower than the general population. We know that there is a greater likelihood that their vote won't be counted, or that they are less likely to actually vote at all. How can we engage more young people or more culturally diverse people in that process? What do you think is the barrier at this stage? And how can people in this room help break that down?
I think it's starting at a direct conversation level, being, hey, if you vote, what do you think you would want to vote for? What are things that you're passionate about? What are things that you want to see change? Because I think for a lot of young people, voting isn't really seen as, oh, my voice will be heard, or it won't actually change anything because the government's going to change themselves anyways without our consent. So I think it's about having that direct conversation about, this is something you can do and this is what the impact of it will be, and what are the benefits of voting.
A lot of the work you do is around refugee advocacy and immigration work. How much of an issue do you think those issues are for young people at large across the Australian community?
I think it's huge. I think even just within my own community at the moment, after all this African gangs talk and having ministers come out and prime ministers come out speaking out against African gangs, but also a huge generalisation and profiling of them, of us, has really put us on the back foot. And why would we want to vote when we don't even have a say, and our side of this discussion hasn't been shown? We don't even have a seat to even address this and have that dialogue to address, hey, why do you feel that way? And for us to say how it's impacting us and really have that genuine discussion back and forth.
One way, I guess, to have that seat or that dialogue is through the media. What more would you like the media to be doing? What can people like myself do to improve and encourage young people to, I guess, express their views and engage in civic society? And what stories are not being covered? What would you like to be seen on your TV by the broader Australian community?
That's awesome. I think what's missing is what are the positive contributions we're actually making to society. We have heaps of doctors, we have heaps of lawyers, we have multiple organisations, we are doing so many great things, but the 2 minutes you see on the TV are just negative stereotypes of what we are allegedly doing, but there's not much shown about the positive contributions we're actually making to society. And when always being demonized and told, go back to where you come from, and so forth, and the Facebook trolls don't support that, it just becomes a place of contentiously. Like, you feel like, I've grown up in Australia and I feel like I belong here, but then when something like that happens, you're being told to go back to where you come from, and you're kind of like, but wait, I've been here my whole life, where is that place? Yeah.
Do you think that's the sentiment that the media, how would you like to see the media tackle that sentiment? Obviously, you've spoken out about the negative reporting around African gangs. What are some of those stories you think the media is not telling? And how would you like us to capture those stories? I guess if you had an opportunity to pitch a story, what would that be?
Wow, that's awesome. If I had an opportunity to pitch a story, I think it would be... I
put you on the spot.
That's all right. I think it would be seeing how the African community is responding to what's happening. Because we're not sitting idle and saying, oh no, they're not one, we don't know what's going on there. But that's not actually shown. So I think it's having that opportunity to say, hey, this is what's happening, but this is the actual response that's happening in the community. And these are ways we can work together to address this, because I don't think it's a one-sided discussion. I don't think only the South Sudanese or only the African community needs to respond to it. I think it's a whole of society approach that needs to happen for that to be solved.
Definitely, I agree. I grew up during I was in high school during the Cronulla riots, and I remember the subsequent vilification of Lebanese Arabs. What do you think, how does that, you touched on it before, how does that impact someone's identity when they see themselves reflected in such negative light on a sort of continuous basis?
I think it has huge ramifications. It becomes a place where, when we're living in the diaspora, when we're not living back in our home country, we've grown up here, and a lot of them are actually born here. So we see Australia as our home, and we've primary school, kindergarten, high school, university. Like, this is our home. But then when the media is saying, no, this isn't, like, this is what you're doing to our society, you don't belong here, and so forth. But then if you go back to South Sudan, it's not 100% safe. But then also, the people living there are like, no, you're from America, Australia. You're from Australia, you don't belong here. So then it becomes this point in the middle where you're just lost. Like, you don't know where you belong, and you don't know what you can do to move forward from this.
You spoke about starting Voices of Salvation. How do you think that organisation and the work you do has been able to help South Sudanese Australians, I guess, push past, I guess, the negative representations that sometimes flood the media and the inaccurate representations that flood the media? And can you elaborate a little bit about the work you do in that space?
Okay, so dual answer now. So with South Sudan Voice of Salvation, we do a lot more work back in South Sudan. Hey, sorry guys, it's my little niece, my nephew. His name is Agot. We do a lot of work back home where we are helping people who are affected by war and who are not being helped because of the location which they live. But here in Australia, we do more community-based work where instead of addressing it at a national level, we're working within our own community, where we're going to local schools and we're speaking to local schools about, hey, this is a context of, like, I am a former refugee. It's not that generalization that you see in the media. I've lived here for 15 to 20 years, and I think when they put a face to the name, it really humanizes it, and it really changes it from the bottom up. And I think that's where we really need to be working. And growing up in the Southern Shire and still being there, a lot of young people in the high schools were saying, I've never met someone who's a refugee. And we're having that discussion and bringing people who are seeking asylum, sorry guys, this is my niece, people who are seeking asylum and having that dialogue and having that direct question and answer where we've got a commonality, right? Where we both go to school, yep, we both go to school, we both play sport, yep, we both love food, oh awesome, like you're just like me, and breaking it down from that humanization point of view.
You co-founded that. For people, for young people who think that that's just an impossible, I guess, goal, setting up an organisation like that, what does it take? Tell us a little bit about, you had this idea, what were the steps you took, and is it possible for other people to do this within their own communities, and what's needed? Yeah,
what it took was a lot of... Bookie, you want to go sit down? Sit on the chair, honey, thank you. Gathi, you want to go with Bookie? Thank you. No? Okay. What it really took was just being fed up. Like, we got to a point where there was inaction. There was nothing happening where we felt something should be happening. And we just got to the point where we're like, okay, well, let's just do it ourselves. We don't have to wait until we're 30. We don't have to wait till someone who's called a leader comes along and does it. We can be the change that we want to see in this current situation, and we don't have to ask permission to make it happen. And before this, it was never seen before in my community for 17, 18, 19-year-olds to be creating their own organisation and taking the first step, regardless of us not knowing what's ahead or what it's going to look like. It was about having that drive and that motivation to start it. It took us 30 days to sit down every single day in the school holidays at that point and put together the constitution, put together all the legalities of it all. We had a lot of support from local community organizations who were like, yeah, we're going to support you to do this. And it's that ongoing support, because when you're 18, you didn't think you'd be starting an organization. Like,
I'd imagine one of the other barriers for young people to sort of really take a change would be money. Do these things need money?
Not for us. When we started, we were like, okay, if we apply for funding, how long until we actually get the money? And it took far too long. So we said, okay, some of us are students, some of us are working. Let's just see what we can all contribute together. So we ended up putting down 250 just for our first fundraising event. We went to local community organizations, local churches, said this is what we want to do, this is how we want to do it. Would you support us? And what could you do to contribute and assist us in doing so? And in that, we had a local church say, you can use our hall, you don't have to pay. And then we also went to a couple of organizations, and that's when Anglican Aid said, hey, we'll support you. We'll send it out to our networks, and we can do this together, and we won't charge any fees. And for us, I was like, whoa, that's awesome, okay. And that brought that credibility for 18-year-olds to be starting an organization. There's that hesitation for people to actually be financially contributing or donating. But when we are working alongside a credible organization as big as Anglican Aid, then they're like, okay, well, we know you're being auspiced, and we know that support is there.
Did you feel supported by the community, or I guess was it sort of a slow uptick or uptake in those early days?
Yeah, it was. The support was very close with our families. So our parents would stand by us. They would say, "Okay, we're gonna cover the transport for this event. We're gonna cover food." But the wider community in general, a bit more hesitant. They could have taken it as, if you're doing that, you're somehow insulting us for not doing it first. So it took leaders in the community or elders in the community to come and speak at our events and say, hey, you don't need to feel offended that these young people are doing this first. We just need to support them and encourage them because this is where our future's heading and it's in good hands. And that's where the support came.
Have you ever sensed in any of the work that you've done, not just with that one organisation, but with the stuff that you've done with the UNHCR and elsewhere, that people doubted your abilities and your capabilities because of your age?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And how they sort of express that? Can you give us an example, I guess, of an experience you had that was, I guess, a bit demoralising, where you felt that you were being overlooked purely because you were younger than others in the room?
Yeah, so what I went to speak at in Geneva at the time was the NGO consultation. So it's a room full of 500 NGOs from across the world, as well as some government stakeholders. And there was less than 5 young people in the room. So when you go to put your name tag up to speak, maybe one of the 5 will actually be chosen to speak. But when we would speak in a way that is captivating but straight to the point, and with a solution, recommendations, that's it. Let's move forward. Which they found quite shocking. They're like, oh wait, is that all? Because quite a few states and NGOs would start with a huge statement or a huge blurb, but they're like, we're running out of time. Like, come on. But when we would speak, and we would speak to the point of their policy, or quoting some of their work and giving them recommendations on how we can be making that better and how we should have a discussion with them and sit at the table with them to make that happen. It came as a bit of a shock. And we had nice recommendations at the end where Philippa Grandi would be like, oh yeah, the young people somewhere here. Great work. Like, thanks for your short and quick, concise recommendations. We appreciate it. Yeah.
What are, I guess, some of the biggest barriers that young people face? You've spoken about the need, I guess, for government to show that it supports young people by creating a youth minister. You've spoken about being overlooked. What are some of those other barriers that you face?
I think young people, we are quite busy. We quite time poor, to say the least. Uni, work, multiple jobs, but we'll always try and find time for our passion projects or something we're passionate about. But I think it's finding that time to sit down and be like, okay, well, this is something I'm really passionate about, and how can I be contributing to this in a meaningful manner?
Do you think that the onus is on schools to become more encouraging of young people to take up those extra curricular activities? How can we get around this, I guess, lack of time that young people face because they are locked in to being at school between 8:45 and 3 o'clock, 5 days a week?
Yeah, I think it's definitely schools and universities saying, hey, this is a fantastic opportunity. We'll support you to attend. And really, really pushing that. Because I know for myself, I didn't want to attend. When my principal said, hey, this is a leadership conference, I negotiated with him because I was like, does it have free food? And he said, yeah. And I was like, do I have to wear my school uniform? And he's like, just for the photo, you can change. I was like, okay. Do I have to come back to school after? He said, no. I said, okay, I'll go. But he knew the long-term effects and the impacts that it would have on myself. But I didn't see that. So I think it's really having teachers and principals really encourage young people to see and actually pursue these other curricular activities.
In your keynote speech, you spoke about being inspired by seeing other young people taking action. Is that the key? is it young people inspiring young people that is the key to continuing that cycle?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Why is it that I guess that connection happens? Do you think the issues that we hear our leaders in government talking about are just not resonating with young people and not addressing their concerns? You touched on climate change. Why is it that, you know, young people are best or most capable of inspiring other young people? Or I guess, what are your thoughts?
I think it's that whole relatable factor. Like, if you see someone who looks like you or who is of your age category on TV, you're going to stop and you're going to be like, oh, what are they saying? Like, let me hear what they're saying, because if they're able to do that, then, you know, you're able to do that. Like, you're fully capable if they are. And that's that huge encouragement. And that's exactly what we needed. So when I went to that leadership conference where I saw young people my age speaking about it, but not just speaking about it, they went through it step by step. Identify what the issue is that you're currently facing. Identify the steps on how to address it. Identify who you need to talk to. Is it a local issue? Is it a federal issue? Is it a state issue? And really gave us that guidance to be able to do it. I think if it was someone who wasn't my age telling me that, I'd be like, oh, yeah, sure, cool. It's because you're 25 or something. But because they were 16 and 17, I was like, whoa, well, I guess if you can do it, then I can do it. And it's that whole participatory effect and that whole relational aspect of it all.
A lot of the work you do is in serious stuff, you know, really serious stuff. Can be traumatic. It has a personal connection to yourself. Have there ever been times where you've been scared or hesitant, and how did you push through that?
I think for me, it's a matter of knowing where I should speak and what I should and shouldn't say. Growing up in Australia, we've been taught speaking up against all forms of injustice and human rights, and, you know, all the amazing stuff it's your right, like you should do it. But then seeing someone like my cousin who grew up in America, went to Harvard and so forth, he went back to South Sudan as well. He created an organization and he went to empower young people, and then he got arrested and he's still currently locked up. And it's because he was empowering young people to speak up against their issues and their challenges. And their issues and challenges were the ineffectiveness of the current government. But then that's where we need to, it's really hard to kind of navigate that system when you need to know when not to speak about a certain issue and where you can. I think the biggest...
Does social media play a role in that? Does it make you more hesitant, or does it empower you to speak out louder because you can speak to more people?
I think it depends on what the issue is. If I'm sitting here criticising the South Sudan government, I need to know if I go back to South Sudan anytime in the next couple of years, they'll still have a record of that. And they could just arrest me for no reason. And it would go back to that post that I made criticising them a couple of years back. So I think it's knowing when to use that platform and when not to use that platform.